Singing Dutchman Productions. Hello and welcome to Doug's Front Porch, a podcast where I get to sit down with friends, old and new, and have honest conversations. Today I welcome Frank Redmon to the Front Porch, a relatively new friend, but one that I can't wait to dig into a juicy conversation with here today. And full disclosure before we start, everybody, Frank is my boss, and I'm sure that'll come up in our conversation today. But Frank, welcome to the Front Porch.
Thank you very much. It's an honor and a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
I am too. Frank, I like to start every episode the same way, just to give my audience a little bit of a chance to get to know you a little bit. And I want to start with this. I always ask this question. Tell us about where you grew up. What was your childhood like? Were you into sports? Were you a music kid? Big family, small family? Let's start there.
Boy, that's it's complicated. And so the reason I say that is I'm not even sure where to start. Maybe start with family. So I have one biological sister and five other step or adopted siblings. So I am the second youngest out of that whole crew of everybody. This blended family. It's kind of a combination of blended family and adopted family, kind of as a combination. So I'm trying to, next up is what kind of a kid was I? Kind of a little bit of everything. So sports and theater, I started off on very young. I remember both playing t-ball and being Frosty the Snowman in my first grade play. And so I've been kind of following along both sports and performing arts throughout all of my youth and into my adulthood. Where I grew up is another complicated kind of a story. Both my biological father and stepfather were both in the Marine Corps, enlisted in the Marine Corps. And so while I was born in San Diego, I was only there for about 6 months. And then we moved to 29 Palms, California. From there, we moved to Okinawa, Japan. And from there, Nederland, Colorado, and then Alliance, Nebraska, and then Scottsbluff, Nebraska. And then I went into the Navy after graduating from high school and moved from Scottsbluff, Nebraska to Orlando, Florida. And then from there, Idaho Falls, Idaho. And then from there, San Diego. And then from there, after I got out of the military, I moved to Green Bay, Wisconsin, where I went to college at St. Norbert College, where the sweatshirt I'm wearing today. And stayed there for, at that point, the longest I had stayed anywhere in my life, 7 years in a row. So I finished college and then started teaching. I was a physics and physical science teacher, got myself back in the arts and directed the theater. So I was the theatrical director, ran the theater, and then taught physics and physical science. Did that for a while. And then when it became apparent that we couldn't afford on two teacher salaries to raise three kids. There just wasn't enough money to do the things we needed with three kids. I went back to something that I had done in the military, which is work in power plants. So we moved to Southern California and worked in power plants. This was, remember all the brownouts that were happening in California back in the late 90s, early 2000s? They were screaming for power plant operators and paying pretty good money. So I about tripled my salary, actually quadrupled my salary when you count in overtime to go back and work in a power plant. Did that for about a year and a half and realized that my calling really was in schools and I couldn't stand the conversations and where I thought my career was going, and I was fairly unhappy. So we moved back to Washington State, not really back. We moved to Washington State. We hadn't been there before, where my parents were. So moved there, went to grad school, got my principal certification, and then became an assistant principal at a kind of an urban school in the south end of Seattle. And then from there became a principal in a suburban school north of Seattle. And then we had a big paradigm shift in our family. We decided we were going to take our children and move overseas. So one of the things that we had talked about was me growing up and living in Okinawa, that it was a really kind of a formative experience for me to understand that the world is a much bigger place than any of the individual places that we had lived. And it was such an important part of my growing up that we thought it would be really important for our three children to have an experience where they weren't living in kind of everything they're being fed by media and all that sort of thing. So we moved to Minsk, Belarus, where my wife and I both taught. So I went back in the classroom and taught for a couple of years there, learned Russian, or at least enough Russian to survive. Stayed there for a couple of years, and then the school organization that I worked for said, "Hey, you were a principal before coming here. Would you go be a superintendent in another one of our schools in Ashgabat, Turkmenistan?" And I talked to our family, and none of us had really learned anything about Ashgabat or Turkmenistan. So we thought, hey, this sounds like a new adventure. Let's do it. So then I became they call it a director, but it's the superintendent of the international school in Ashgabat, Turkmenistan. Stayed there for 4 years, and then I had a thought that I've been doing the job of a superintendent 4 years, but I have a principal's degree. Maybe I ought to go back to school to learn if the stuff I'm doing is what I should be doing as a superintendent. So then we moved back to Wisconsin, where I started a PhD program at UW-Madison, where I eventually did earn my PhD. And then from there, moved back to Washington, where I served as the superintendent in the Quilcene School District for 5 years. And then my wife had the opportunity to start her PhD program at Penn State, which brought us here to Pennsylvania. And then when the opportunity arose at Keystone Central School District, the more I looked at what Keystone Central has been doing and the way it was doing and kind of the path that the district had set itself on, I said, this is a district that is doing the right things in the right ways. Not there yet, but it's starting down the path. I would really love to see if I can add some value and keep supporting that mission, vision, strategic plan, comprehensive plan, and keep us rolling in the right direction, doing great things for kids.
We're going to talk about all that stuff. And there you go, people. I'm done here. We got the whole life story in a couple minutes. There's a lot to unpack there, Frank. And I know that the conversations that you and I have had before, I've learned some of these, all of this moving around that you did. And I've had a lot of children of military parents on the show before. And I always like to ask this question. You moved so much in your childhood.
Mhm.
Looking back on it now as an adult, moving and moving and moving from all over, including internationally as well as a kid, one or two things that looking back now as an adult, those experiences taught you that you utilize today or that you've utilized throughout your life?
I think the something I didn't recognize until probably the last 5 years or so is that I embrace variability, and I'm happy that we live in a diverse world with lots of different ideas and opinions and ways of thinking and being. Uh, Everything from faith to philosophy to eating habits to languages, all these things provide such a rich context in which we live. And I think what it has helped me with throughout my life with all that moving around is just understanding that people are very different than me and very different from each other. And that's both important and valuable and wonderful.
Um, I also like to ask this question to like a situation like you, where you were a kid moving around, and even now as an adult, you've moved so much. Do you have a sense of home? What is home to you?
Yeah, I get that question a lot, interestingly. Uh, I've always defined home as where my people are. And so prior to being married, it was my parents, my siblings, my friends. That was all kind of where I considered home. Um, Now that I'm married with kids, it's where my wife is, and now where my oldest son is. It's here in Pennsylvania because that's where we are. And I guess that's one of those philosophical things that has kind of grown up with me, is that I consider myself something of an existentialist. And so I see the possibilities and the beauty and the interesting things wherever we are, and help that define the positive aspects of my life, and opening up to what might be and what could be really positive wherever I am.
That's a beautiful way of putting all that. And luckily you've had, because there's people that move around a lot and maybe never gain that perspective. And it's so good to hear that through all of your experiences, you do understand what all of that moving can teach somebody,
Mm.
and what you can take from it. I'd like to
Mhm.
back up. When you got done with high school, you made the decision to join the military.
Yeah.
Did that come from the sense that you saw your father, your biological and your stepfather had military service? Was there this sense of service in you that you felt pushed or pulled to do that?
No, actually, it was generally the opposite. I grew up as on the theater and in the stage through my high school. That was kind of the most important thing for me in high school was performing arts. So I was both backstage working on all of the technical stuff, but I was also the lead in every play that I tried out for, and swing choir and concert choir, and I was in a band out in town, and I was doing all these things that was really centered around the performing arts. As I went through high school, I wasn't very connected to the education side of things. I don't consider myself as a successful high school student from the academic perspective. I wasn't, it didn't make much sense to me what we were doing and why we were doing it. And I didn't see the through line from what was going on in class to anything that was interesting to me. So when I was junior or senior, I saw myself as uh, an actor and a musician, and that's what I wanted to do with my life. But then as I got closer to graduation, I recognized that because of a series of decisions that I made throughout my high school career, there's very little chance that I was going to be successful in any kind of post-secondary institution right away. And because of my grades, there's no chance I was going to get any kind of scholarship. My parents both worked they're both psychologists that work for city and county governments. So they didn't have enough money to send me to school. They were sending my sister to school. So I thought, well, okay, I've kind of boxed myself in here. I don't want to stay in Scottsbluff, Nebraska for the rest of my life, having moved all over the world and realizing that there's something more than Scottsbluff, Nebraska that I wanted to participate in. Um, and so I kind of cast around trying to figure out what I was going to do and realized that the military was an option for me, both because a long family history on both my mother's side and my biological father's side of military service. I thought, okay, maybe this will help me get my head on straight, give me a little more specific and directed purpose, and kind of launch me into an adulthood that I think would be more successful than the path I was on in high school.
So you mentioned that when you got out of the military, you had this calling or whatever, you felt this pull to go into teaching or education.
Yeah.
Where do you think that came from?
I think it originally started from a frustration about my high school experience. So there are a couple of kind of crystallizing moments that I vividly recall from high school. And of course, memory is kind of a funky thing. The way I remember it now is that it was the senior swing choir concert. And part of that was all of the seniors, after we did all of our numbers, all the seniors one at a time would come up and say, "Hey, I'm Frank Redmon, and this is what I'm going to do with my life." At that point, I had already decided that I was going into the military. But I was well known in the community as being an actor and a musician, and kind of a little bit of someone who spent more time driving fast and doing things teenagers shouldn't be doing. So I got up in front of the crowd and I said, "Hey, I'm Frank Redmon. I'm going to go in the Navy and become a nuclear engineer." And the crowd erupted in laughter. My assumption was that two assumptions, right? First of all, they thought that I was kidding, because I was a bit of a jokester. And the other thing is, I thought that they believed that I couldn't do it because I wasn't that kind of a kid. And so that was one of those things where I was the kind of kid, if you tell me that I can't, I'm going to demonstrate you wrong and then throw it in your face. Little bit of a chip on my shoulder. And then the other crystallizing moment, I was walking across the stage in graduation or about to receive my diploma. And I realized that the past 4 years in high school didn't set me on a path to do what I wanted to do. And I wasn't even sure what that was. So two things, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and whatever just happened the last 4 years didn't help me out with that. I had to kind of make it up on my own. whether good, wrong, bad, otherwise, I don't know. I just didn't like it. And I thought, I want to come back and be an educator so that no one who walks across a graduation stage shakes some guy's hand that they don't know, gets a piece of paper that they think does them no good, and doesn't know what to do the next day.
It's not that
So,
it's not the typical that's not the typical story for people that get into education. You know, a lot of times you talk to teachers and they're like, "Oh, I had a very influential teacher in high school that showed me that education, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera."
yeah,
Or, "Oh, my family has always been teachers." It's, but to hear your story is refreshing and also rewarding to know that you were able to continue and make this happen and become an educator yourself based on this drive that you had. But I know from 24 years in the classroom that there are tons of kids like you just described yourself as a senior in high school that are walking up there at graduation, shaking some guy or some woman's hand they've never met before, or they maybe saw once, they don't even know who they are, and getting that piece of paper in there, that what do I do with this?
yeah.
I don't even know if it's worth anything. So, and we're gonna go deeper on this topic, but I always like to hear like whenever I meet a teacher, I was like, well, what got you into teaching? And everybody has different stories, of course, but yours is I appreciate hearing that story. And I'd like to kind of like shift a little bit as we talked about, you went to college, you became a teacher and a science teacher, and then at some point you had this calling to get into administration. You talked about becoming a superintendent, but what was the initial push to make you decide to go into academic leadership in the sense of being a principal?
I related, I want to back up just a second. Something you said, kind of the typical path for teachers, parents who are teachers and inspirational teachers. I had both of those. So my grandmother was a professor of music at the University of California, San Diego. My mother and stepfather both taught at the post-secondary level about psychology and social service and that sort of thing. So I have a long history of education alongside the long history of military. So I think that was another thread that kind of helped push me towards the possibility that education was a potential future. I would also say that I had some very inspirational teachers. I remember Dean Opp, who was my theater teacher throughout high school for my first 3 years of high school. And he was kind of fundamental for reconnecting me to school. We hear this over and over again that the extracurriculars are what tie some kids to school. And I would say absolutely without a doubt, it was the only reason. Theater and music were the only reasons I ever came to school. And so that Mr. Opp was my kind of tie-in and inspiration. Um,
As many people that listen to the show know, your story echoes mine. I was also very involved in music and theater in high school, and that wasn't the only reason I came to school. But when I look at my life now and the friends that I still have from that time period in my life, they are all those music and theater kids that we had forged such a strong bond of a
mhm,
friendship.
yeah,
And we've all gone different paths, and many of us aren't practicing theater or music anymore. Some of us are, but looking back at your story echoes so much of mine in the sense that for some kids, and we know this as educators, that is the only reason some kids get out of bed in the morning and get on that school bus because
yeah,
they hate every other aspect of their day, except for that 50 minutes they're in the band room or that 45 minutes they're on stage doing whatever.
yeah,
Yeah. It's good.
yeah.
It's good to remind people of that because I think all too often the greater community kind of forgets that aspect of school, and it's such an important part of school as a whole. But just go back. I would like to find out what pushed you
Yeah.
to get into administration and leadership.
Yeah. So when I said that I left the school that I was teaching in the Green Bay area, De Pere High School, my principal at the time said, Redmon, I know you're going to be back as an educator. There's just something about you. I know that you can't quit this and walk away and never come back. And he said, when you do come back, think about coming back as an educational leader. And I said, I remember asking him why. What do you mean by that? I really enjoy teaching physics. I enjoy my work in theater. He said, you have a way of working with and understanding people that would position you as a really strong leader that would be good for kids. He said, I know you're coming back. When you do, go back to school, get your principal cert. And so I took that to heart. And I thought about that for the next year and a half working in power plants, there was this, this little guy on my shoulder saying, "Hey, what about education leadership?"
Have you what I guess I've never asked anybody this question that I know that's in educational leadership. So you had the classroom experience, which I can of course relate to, but what is it now that you've been in educational leadership? What is it about it that you enjoy? And what do you miss from not being in the classroom?
I'll start with the second part first, right? What the thing I miss most about being in the classroom was there's a feeling of connection and success when you see the light turn on in a student's eye and they get it and they take it further than where you thought it was going to go. That that kind of constant positive feedback when you're seeing kids that are being successful. And I was very fortunate, right? I was teaching freshman science, which was a little more challenging, but I was also teaching two different flavors of physics, right? AP physics and kind of an introductory physics. And in all of my classes and on the theater, I could see that spark happening daily with the kids, and that was that continuous positive feedback, that loop that really got me excited about the work I was doing. The the cycle in education about that feedback loop has dramatically slowed down. So where before as a teacher, I would see that positive reinforcement happening every day, in leadership, it happens on a different time scale, right? Whether it's you're working with teachers to shift some practices that you know are going to help out in the classroom so that that teacher can get that sort of reinforcing spark of inspiration from the students. That's where that spark happens for me, right? Seeing a teacher go, "Oh, I get it now. When I do this thing and I work with the students this way, or I say things this way, or set my class up this way, or put these things on," right? You can start to see that, and then they start to gain momentum and start to move forward, right? So rather than I see my role as, rather than being the teacher of the students, now I have the instructional role for the adult professional staff and the paras and even sometimes the custodians. And as I moved into the superintendency role, that has shifted again and again. That reinforcement loop time has extended further. So now I'm working with central office folks who are working with principals, who are working with teachers, who are working with students, right? So it's all kind of that same thing, is um, working with people to help inspire them to do great things. Whether it's students to do great things with their lives, or teachers to help kids do great things, or principals to help teachers do great things, or central office folks to help principals to help teachers to help kids. It's all that kind of same sort of thing, right?
So now I'm going to ask you a really tough question. I've had people on my show that have been very successful athletic coaches that kind of have the same job to motivate people and to breed some sense of teamwork and team
Mhm.
quality. So, in your personal opinion, as you do your job every day, how do you go about building a culture where people want to strive to be successful so that you get to see that spark that you talk about,
Yeah.
so that you get to see that success?
I think there's a few things that I focus on that I think, first of all, I am not the all-knower and deliverer of knowledge about all things education. Nobody is that smart. I don't claim to have the toolbox that's going to be the right thing for everybody every time. Uh, and it just kind of popped into my head, like, where did I come up with that? And I think it goes back to teaching, where I learned that it wasn't me delivering Newton's laws. It was me helping students understand how to explore the world so that Newton's laws made sense and connected with their reality, right? So the knowledge and the ability and the thinking was already there in my students. It's just me helping them uncover that for themselves by structuring some experiences. And I think I take the and it took me a couple of years to get there, right? I was my first couple of years, I'm the content deliverer. I know everything about physics. You know nothing. I'm going to give this stuff to you. And then after hitting the wall a couple of times on that, I had to kind of rethink and shift how I was doing things in the classroom. And I think that carried on to my leadership, right? I'm not telling teachers stuff that they don't know. I'm having discussions with teachers about, hey, what are we noticing here? Hey, let's look at some of what some of the research says about when you run into these walls, what might be some opportunities or some problem solving methods that you could use. Or I've seen some other people do this, or I know that your neighbor is doing these things. Let's all work together to see if we can get you past the thing that's really bugging you right now. And I have carried that forward. It's that I want to work alongside of you to help you solve the things that are bugging you, right? We want to look at the information that we have at hand to see where we are right now and find the difference between where we are and where we want to be. We'll discover those things together, and then we together will design a path to get to from where we are to where you want to be.
The one attribute that you didn't talk about that, and I'll say that, and I'm not saying this to inflate your ego or to get in good graces with you as an employee of yours, but the one thing that I noticed from the start when you came to us a year ago, which was refreshing in many ways from what I had experienced in all of my career from leadership, minus maybe one or two people that I had worked for, was that you from the start, and this is a quality that so many people, teachers included, don't understand the power of, is that you came and you met with kids, you met with teachers, and instead of talking at those groups, you sat and listened to those
Hmm.
groups. And that is such a powerful tool that too many people in our society, outside education, anywhere, it's hard for people to sit and listen to other people. I'm not saying agree with them. I'm not saying that you're like, oh, yes, absolutely, everything you're saying is true. But the power of listening. And I noticed that from you from the start. And I had students, like you met with our student government kids right from the beginning. And that was
Mhm.
the one thing that they all said after you had left a couple of those meetings. They all said, he actually listened to us. That's a powerful tool. Is that something that you think is that a trait that you've always had? Or is that something you think maybe you've developed over the years?
Um, I don't know, self-reflection isn't always 2020. What I do know is I heard from a very young age this kind of adage, proverb, something or other. You have two eyes, you have two ears, you have one mouth. Notice and listen and sit back twice as much as things come out of your mouth, right? So listen twice as much as you speak, observe twice as much as you speak. And so I have taken that to heart as long as I can remember. From a very little kid, I remember I need to listen more than I speak. And I don't know if it was my grandfather that taught me. I don't remember exactly where it comes from, but I hear this message. I was just listening to a radio show or a podcast on leadership the other day, and that same idea came up again, right? You have two ears, you have one mouth. Listen twice as much as you speak. And it makes more sense to me because I know that I don't know all of the things. I've seen a lot of stuff. I've read a lot of stuff. I've experienced a lot of stuff. That doesn't mean I know anything. It doesn't mean I know you or your context or the thing that happened 5 minutes ago or the thing that's bugging you from or kept you up all night. I don't know any of that stuff. And before I think we can problem solve together, I need to listen to you and your context and figure out where you're coming from and where you're going before we can start designing that path.
Uh, Boy. So now I'm going to ask you a couple off the cuff questions
Okay.
in regards to all the kind of stuff that we have been talking about. Number one, in your mind, and I'm not saying just Keystone Central, I'm talking education as a whole right now in America. In your opinion, what are schools doing right?
Schools are uh, embracing relationships, thinking about how to start with a student who comes in with fairly limited literacy, numeracy, measurement, like the set of skills that 4 and 5 year olds come in with, and looking at where do we want this person to go in order to be successful after they leave us, no matter what their pathway is. I think that we have conceptualized that work in a pretty good way, right? Our goal isn't to indoctrinate. Our goal is to set free.
What are we doing wrong?
I think the way that we're doing it, and this is largely, right? This is not every classroom. This is not every school, not even every school district. I think where we stumble a lot is that we are, by and large, conservative traditionalists when it comes to our practice. I think this is part of human nature. We behave as we have experienced. Many of us, I would say, I would suggest that most of us in education grew up in a system whereby we were instructed through a didactic sort of you sit and listen to things, and later on you're going to tell me what I told you. And that is pretty antithetical to the way human beings actually learn, right? Learning psychology and the learning systems have not crossed over very much until very recently. We're starting to see now, we're starting to use better tools to understand the learning process. We can look at the science of reading and how the brain remaps itself when we get into really specific phonics instruction, which has helped us go back to something that we were doing 20 years ago, because it actually is pretty solid in terms of helping people change scribbles onto a wall into words and meaning. And I think we're getting better at recognizing the power of relationships. We've known for a long time. We can go back to Dewey and look at his writing and thinking about how relationships matter, how student passion matters, how connection to something that is purposeful and meaningful to the individual matters. And we have come back to that a few times in education. We're coming back to it again now, of how do we connect what a student wants to do with the things that we know are important for them to be successful when they leave us. I think, to your question, what are we not doing very well right now? It's closing that loop. I think too many of us, again, because we're sort of conservative traditionalists in terms of our behavior, we don't know how to behave in such a way where we shift our paradigm from being content deliverers to being learning coaches. We need to be learning coaches. We don't need to teach German or physics. We need to teach kids how to learn. And there will be times when our kids say, I want to understand Newton's laws, or I want to understand how to have a conversation in Germany in a cafe and feel comfortable, right? Those kind of things will be important to some students. And we need to get better at finding the opportunities to teach those kids about those things, because it's important, it's on their pathway, and it needs to be contextualized in the standards that we know are important for them to be successful adults.
Where do you see public ed going in the future?
That direction. I'm seeing this in the last 3 states that I've worked in the last 10 years. That's Wisconsin, Washington, and here. The education system is trying to reimagine itself so that education is more personalized, is more specific to the needs of the individual, and is really shaping itself so that it's the relationship between learning coaches and students that helps the day-to-day operation, what's happening in the classrooms and the hallways, be kind of the guide rather than the student handbook or the set of consequences if you step out of line.
Okay, so money's not an issue. There's no politics involved. You have your magic wand. And everybody has gone to school. Everybody knows what school is. Everybody thinks they know what school is like based on their own personal experience. And it might be 40 years ago or it might be 5 years ago. But money's not an option. You can do anything you want. Talking about what you think public ed's going to look like, how would you describe what a school that is doing all of those things would look like? If we could flip the switch tomorrow and turn KCSD, Keystone Central School District, into a school that is doing the things that you just talked about from a philosophical standpoint and actually putting them into motion, what would it look like? How, for somebody that's only used to coming into the classroom, they sit in their desk, teachers up front, they got the math problems on the board, they're working through the math problems, they do their homework, they take a test, they move on, next day we got a new concept. But in this new reality, or this future reality of public ed, how do you describe what that would actually look like for a student to somebody that has no idea about what we're talking about?
This is going to sound like a political dodge. I do not intend it as such. Here's what I believe to be the reality. There is no one type of school that is perfect for all students. There is a segment of our students for whom the didactic information transfer kind of schooling is the right thing, and they're wildly successful, and it sets them on a fantastic path for their future. For some of our students, it needs to look like an office environment whereby they walk in the morning and they know their set of tasks, because at the beginning of the year or the beginning of the month or the beginning of the quarter, their learning coach has said, here's all the standards that you need to demonstrate mastery of in order to progress to the next step. and you know the series of steps that are required to get you to the goal, which is high school graduation. A sub goal is a high school graduation, to the longer goal of getting to on the whatever pathway comes after that. There are some students who just need to know that there is someone who is in their corner and has their back, and makes sure that they have a strong sense of security, whether it be food security or housing security or any of those other things. And so I've seen tons of models that are really, really good for the students that are there, but none of those models are good for all kids.
So how do we tackle all these issues? I mean, it's an honest question. If we think about if we want, because all the things you just talked about, there are people all shaking their head. I'm that kid, or I was that kid, or my kid is that kid,
Right.
and they're expecting whatever school district they live in that they would hope that those teachers, that administration, that school board is providing those things for their child.
Yeah,
And we know from a financial perspective or just from lack of resources that it's, no, I'm not going to say it's impossible, but in some instances, it's really hard to try and accomplish those things you just talked about.
agreed. So remember, you started off with money's no object, politics is no object, all that kind of stuff. The only way we can get to this highly personalized and personalizable, I may have just made up a new word there. Um, I don't think it's possible with our current situation. And by that current situation, I mean, we have a school funding system that's based on a variety of taxes, largely property taxes, but little bits and bobs of money that come from various spots. And it will never be enough because human beings are infinitely variable and complex. For an education system to properly serve all of the infinitely variable and complex people, our system needs to be similarly variable and complex. We already have the complexity, but it's more bureaucratic complexity than it is actual educational complexity. So how do we get there from here? I don't know. I think it takes a vast restructuring of how we think about school as a society, not just educators, but parents and legislators and community members and grandparents, and everyone needs to rethink about school to find another way of connecting how people learn, right? The psychology of learning and how neurons are created and sustained and built up over time, how things work in terms of people's social emotional health and security. Again, going back to issues around poverty or issues around dysfunctional family organization, like there's so many things that need to get fixed along the way. It's bigger than school. So much needs to happen on so many levels. I don't, honestly, I can't think of a way for us to fix it. If I could, I'd probably be sitting in a different seat talking to, on a different level about this sort of thing. I do think that it would behoove us, and by us, I mean communities and schools and teachers and leaders and students, to go see some of the the variety of schools that are out there and just kind of sit with students, teachers, administrators, and community members and say, how did this work for you and why did it work for you? And then go see a different one and ask the same questions, and go see a different one and ask the same questions. And from that, that variability that I talked about scales up to communities, right? So the Keystone Central School District is a whole mishmash of a bunch of different communities. So we need to figure out for Central Mountain High School, that encompasses all of the communities that send students to Central Mountain High School, we need to figure out, is there an overarching rightest, bestest version of school that incorporates that variability that we know is necessary for our kids? And we're heading down that path, right? We have our CTC programs, we have our academic slant of things. So I think there's ways for kids to engage with, to start engaging with what they're passionate about. We are looking at a pathways model that will further encourage students to think about who they are and what they want to be right now. Not that that's permanent what they're going to be forever, but so they can start down a path and test it out, right? I think we as a district are getting better at that, and we are not alone. There's a lot of school districts in Pennsylvania. There's a lot of school districts everywhere across the country that are looking at this same problem in similar ways.
We could keep talking about this kind of stuff forever, but we can't, just time wise. But Frank, I would just like to, as we wrap this part of the conversation up, the visions that and you know a lot of it has to come from your shared experiences. You've been a lot of places, you've seen a lot of different things, and you're in a community now that, and this is a fact. I'm not making fun of anybody or trying to pick on anybody, but a lot of the people in the community that we work in have not traveled much, have not gotten
Yep.
out of that central Pennsylvania region. And you're right, through shared experiences, through actually getting out there and seeing different things, it opens your eyes, or one's eyes, to the possibilities that a lot of people don't realize exist, or think, oh, that's something we could never do. But yet you could, right? So,
Mhm.
your leadership has been so far. I mean, again, I'm not trying to put a feather in your hat or get a pay raise out of you as employee of the month or anything like that. But I do want to thank you for the leadership that you've brought so far in the year that you've been with us. You've exhibited traits and skills that are very much welcome. And we look forward, as an educator myself working for you, I look forward to working towards that vision of a new school, of something that better serves more students and I am a traditionalist and I am all of those things, but I also understand the system needs to change in America.
Mhm.
It just has to. The model we're teaching under no longer is applicable to the economy and the world that we're turning these kids out into. But it's a tough conversation to have with a lot of people. So the challenge, you have a tough challenge ahead of you, as in that leadership role. But so far, from my perspective, we're walking a good path right now, and I look forward to continuing
Yeah.
that walk. But that's enough talking shop. I end every episode with 10 quick questions about nothing that we just talked about, just for my audience to get to know Frank Redmon a little bit better. So, are you ready for your 10 quick questions, Frank?
I don't know if I am or not. I guess we'll jump into it and see.
You're going to be fine. And I look forward to hearing some of these answers for sure. Question number 1: what is your morning drink of choice?
Coffee.
How do you take your coffee?
Black. Although that's a recent change. I don't know how long you want these answers to be. As more gray hairs have come up, my tolerance for dairy product in my coffee has gone down.
Okay.
So now back to black.
Have you been a lifelong coffee drinker?
Off and on, the Navy did a really good job of teaching me how to drink coffee as a vocation.
And living in Washington State for a while,
That
I'm
only
sure
reinforced
also.
it.
Right. Okay, question number 2. This one I'm really interested in hearing your answer to. Who is a go-to musical artist or group for you?
Oh, I can't answer that question because if you look at my iTunes playlist, yesterday I was listening to some Turkmen traditional folk music, which came on the heels of Rush. And so my tastes are all over the place.
Sure.
I think one of the benefits of growing up with a grandmother who's a professor of music and an author of music textbooks and stuff like that in the 70s was a really wide appreciation of how people put sounds together to carry a story.
Right. Well, you've had a really bad day, and you get to pick one band that I know if I click play on this, it's gonna pick me up. Can you give me one of those, or one?
It depends. No.
Okay.
So it depends on the day. So some days it's Tchaikovsky. Some days it's Led Zeppelin. Some days it's Fish. Some days it's just some random country radio station that I can find on the dial.
Yeah.
It's hugely variable.
Those are all great answers, though, by the way. All right. Question number 3. Maybe this is a really tough question for you to give one answer to as well. What movie can you watch over and over again and it never gets old?
If my wife were in the room, I'd feel obligated to say The Princess Bride.
It's a great film. And
It's a great film.
if your wife's not in the room,
And I don't mind that movie at all. I've seen it more times than I care to count. And I don't rewatch movies very often. I'm more of a reader of books.
okay.
So if I've had a really bad day and I just want to kind of turn my brain off, a book that I've read or a series of books that I've read are the Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. I've read them all probably more than 20 times because
Oh
every
my
now and again
goodness.
I'm like, oh, I just need to reread that again.
Yeah.
Um, and this might, uh, I don't know if this is interesting to literature teachers or not, but what I've found is, and it's helped me a lot, is that I see something a little bit different in the writing every time.
Sure. Yeah. No, I've experienced that on books that I've reread as from something that I read as a high school student that I had to read in English class, and then as an adult. I mean, I'm sure many of us have had that experience. Okay. The perfect segue into question number 4. What is the last? And I know for your job you read a lot. You have to, whether it's tax stats or data from tests or whatever, standardized tests. But what's the last thing that you read?
The I'm reading this Universal Design for Mathematics. That's so I try to keep a professional book and reading for pleasure brain candy book going at the same time. So that's the professional book that I'm reading through right now. And then I'm a kind of a sci-fi junkie, just junkie brain candy, not really pushing thinking. There's a series of books called The Backyard Starship. It's pure entertainment. It's
Okay.
just something to let my eyes and brain do as I'm falling asleep.
Oh, there you go. Okay. All right. Question number 5. What's your favorite pizza topping?
The You're asking me to reduce things to a point that I'm one of those people. I don't know. It depends on the day. Like
Okay.
some days I'm like I need artichoke on my pizza. Some days I'm like, yep, gotta have pepperoni or anchovies or olives or sausage. I don't know. It depends, right?
Okay.
It's and I realize I'm not giving you any definitive answers, but I can't say that I have one thing that I'm always about.
People, can we tell that Frank runs school, is it a lot of school board meetings and meets with the community and he's able to pivot and not give a straight answer? We love it. Your skills you've worked on. All right, here you
How
one
about
you
this?
go.
I'll say favorite topping on a pizza, no matter what, cheese. I think cheese is a necessary
Yeah.
ingredient for pizza, no matter what.
Amen. Amen. All right. Laying on the beach or going for a hike?
Oh, a hike.
Okay.
If you put me on a beach, I'm going to want to get in the water and go diving. So I can't lay on a beach. I'm also a redhead, so the sun thing for too long, not really that. But I love hiking. I've been all over hiking in lots of different places, and I can never get enough of it.
Oh, good. Good. All right. Question number 7. You have invited me over for dinner. What are you making?
So here I am with a slippery answer again. It depends on what you like. It starts off with a conversation of, so what kind of things do you like? Because
I eat anything, Frank. I love everything.
all right, so we're gonna do some experimentation. I'm gonna make up a recipe for my own hummus. So we'll start off with some flatbread and hummus, and it'll be nothing like you've ever had before because I make it up new every time I do it. And then we'll probably do what we call kind of a Mexican lasagna, where it has the same kind of layered approach, but it's more Southwest flavors and ingredients. And then dessert could be anything from a berry cobbler to a plate of cookies or kind of whatever we think is interesting at the moment.
Who does most of the cooking at home? You or your wife?
It depends on who's working more.
Uh,
So one of my many jobs before coming into education is I was the head chef of a bistro in Green Bay while I was going to college. So I love to cook. I think I'm pretty good at it. Um, my physique suggests that I do a lot of experimentation.
I learned another thing about you. I didn't know that you had a chef background. Boy, Frank, every time we talk, another layer comes out. I'll tell you, it's unbelievable.
It's
All
that
those things,
variability thing.
all those things were sound delicious, of course, and I enjoy all of those things. So anytime, I'll be waiting for the invitation. Question number 8. You've traveled a lot, and your answer could be a repeat of a place that you've gone. But I always ask, what's a dream vacation destination for you?
New Zealand.
Have you been already, or is that would
Nope,
be a first time? Okay.
that'd be the first time.
To see
Right.
where the Lord of the Rings was filmed?
So for a variety of reasons, right? One is to see where the filming happened. One is to go scuba diving because they apparently have some incredible scuba diving, but also the hiking and exploring. So it kind of hits all of the things, right? So the nerdy Lord of the Rings kind of stuff, the hiking outdoorsy stuff, the scuba, it's all kind of in one place. So I think that's kind of my ideal go-to for a dream vacation.
Sounds good. Question number 9. What's something you're afraid of?
Not having something to do.
Oh, that's a great answer. That's a great answer. Do you have a hard time just relaxing?
Mhm.
Okay. Okay. All right. Last question. What job, other than one that you have had, like a dream job, would you love to have?
I toyed with the idea of becoming a marine engineer, so oceanographic engineer. It kind of combines kind of my linear, more mathematical, creative side of things and the ocean.
Okay. That's great. Great answers, Frank. Frank, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. I think people can tell from our conversation that we could have kept going a lot longer, and we'll have to do that without the microphones at some point for sure. But
For sure.
it's rare that we get to hear the voice, like some of the stuff you brought up. I just want to come back to, just circle back, not to rehash anything, but people, as you're listening to this conversation, school is changing, and it's going to have to, just like everything in our society has to change and evolve if we're going to continue to be successful.
Mhm.
And I would challenge anyone listening to this podcast, this episode, to think about your experience in school. Maybe you had the same experience that Frank had and you didn't really like it. There was one aspect of it you liked, but the majority of your day was ho-hum, or you just like, get me out of here. Or maybe you were that kid that really enjoyed school, and think about how different the world is that our teenagers that we're teaching in high school right now are entering into than it was from what the world that you listeners have entered into in whether the 80s, the 90s, or the early 2000s, or whenever that was. And not be afraid to think about maybe change might be the right thing for the system or for society as a whole. So hopefully some of Frank's conversation here today with us let us at least think about maybe school in a different way. And I think that's an important thought to implant in our brains. But Frank, I want to thank you so much for your leadership over the last year, being able to work for you. I look forward to continuing that relationship and moving our schools forward to create even better products than what we're turning out right now. And I just want to thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedule for coming on the Front Porch.
Doug, it's been a real pleasure, and I want to push back on you a little bit. I don't think you work for me. I think you work with me. And that's the relationship that I want to have with all of us, right? The only way we can do this work is if we do it together, standing shoulder to shoulder, looking at where we are and where we want to be, and trying to find the way between those two things.
Those are two different visions from two different kinds of leaders, everybody. You just heard it there. The people that say you work for me and the people that you say work with me. So I appreciate that, Frank, and I'll gladly continue to work with you as we move this ship forward. Thanks again for coming on the Front Porch. I look forward to talking to you real soon again.
Likewise. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Doug's Front Porch, a conversational podcast with your host, Doug Maidenford. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Your ratings and reviews will help others find the show. You can follow along on Facebook, X, and Instagram. Just look for Doug's Front Porch. If you would like to financially support our endeavors, there's a Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes. I thank you in advance for any contributions. Please feel free to tell all your friends about the show, and I'll see you all next time on my Front Porch.